Hey everybody, welcome back to Cruise Blog. It's Allie, and today I'm going to be sharing with you the worst things that have happened to me while cruising as someone who's been cruising for over 20 years. So let's get into it. Vacations are meant to be relaxing and rejuvenating, especially when you're cruising. With fewer logistics to plan, cruises are one of the most convenient ways to travel, in my opinion. Even still, there's nothing better than a cruise going exactly as you meticulously planned. However, this isn't always how life works, sadly. Unforeseen circumstances or unwanted events can throw a wrench in travel plans. As an avid cruiser, I've been traveling around the world for 2 decades. Family cruises to the Caribbean eventually transformed into global sailings to far-flung destinations. One of the most memorable voyages of my life was a semester abroad on Semester at Sea, where I embarked on a 100-day cruise around the world. I've been fortunate that the vast majority of my travels have gone off without a hitch. Most of the time, my cruises do go exactly as planned with little disruption or unforeseen circumstances. However, with so much travel under my belt, it shouldn't come as a surprise that I've had some pretty horrible things happen to me while cruising. Many of the things I've experienced were completely out of my control, and as a type A control freak, I would argue that these unexpected experiences while cruising have helped me learn to be more flexible and adaptable. I've learned to appreciate when cruise plans come to fruition exactly as expected. But sometimes you have to make lemonade from lemons. We can't always control everything that happens in life, especially while traveling. So here is a list of the worst things that have happened to me while cruising from someone with over 2 decades of travel experience. And up first was an attempted robbery. Perhaps the worst experience I've had while cruising was when I was nearly robbed while my cruise was docked in Casablanca, Morocco. My now husband and I had spent the day in Marrakesh, Morocco on a day trip from the port city. We had spent most of the day exploring the Medina and the city's old town. While walking between the old and new city, my husband and I were crossing a large roundabout. 2 men on a scooter started to approach us rapidly while we were crossing the street, and while I thought the scooter was overcorrecting, the men swooped right in front of us on their scooter to attempt to rob me. The passenger on the scooter grabbed my crossbody as the two sped by. Luckily, my crossbody didn't break and they were unsuccessful in trying to rob me, but I was left pretty bruised by the force of the bag trying to be ripped from me as they were speeding very fast. And my husband said he absolutely never wants to hear that scream of terror come from me again. Another horrible thing that happened to me while cruising is experiencing an immigration strike. During my semester abroad, our ship was docked in Salvador, Brazil for 6 days. During the stop, my dad and sister flew to Brazil from South Dakota to meet with me after months of being away from family. We had planned to fly to Rio de Janeiro from Salvador for a few days to see the main attractions. Unfortunately, when our ship docked in Salvador, the immigration staff went on strike. Although we were allowed to get off the ship in Salvador, we were not given our passports until immigration had stamped them and our visas were confirmed. So this meant that my family had flown across the world, but I could not leave Salvador, putting our plans up into the air. When my dad and sister eventually made it to the port and I was stranded without a passport, I ran into my dad's arms and cried like a little girl. After begging and pleading with the staff on our ship, I signed a form asking for my passport to be expedited with immigration. We were able to rearrange our morning flight to the evening, and we made it to Rio de Janeiro as planned for our tours. This was the only time I've ever experienced an immigration strike while cruising, but it was quite disruptive. Another bad thing that happened to me while cruising is a parking lot knife fight. Although this didn't necessarily happen while we were on board a cruise or while cruising, it happened in the terminal parking lot as we were disembarking in Port Canaveral. After getting off Mariner of the Seas, my husband and I were attempting to leave the parking garage at Port Canaveral. Since we had parked at the top level, everyone else on the lower levels were able to leave before us. And because there was no one directing traffic, the higher levels of the parking garage were at a standstill for more than an hour. While waiting in the line to leave, you could feel everyone's frustration at the situation. We were all surprised that no one was there to help funnel the cars so that those of us on the higher levels of the parking garage could actually make some progress. With the tensions and the outside temperatures running high, a fight broke out between 2 different families traveling. One of the drivers ran out with a knife to the other driver, creating quite the commotion in the parking garage. Even worse, this caused the traffic to back up more when the cops arrived at the scene and had to handle the situation. Another terrible thing that happened while I was cruising is that my ship was actually hit. Another terrible experience I had while cruising happened while I was on board Mariner of the Seas. Although this didn't have an impact on our itinerary, it certainly wasn't in our cruising plans. While my sister and I were on Mariner of the Seas, we unexpectedly docked in Freeport, Bahamas for maintenance. This was meant to be a sea day, but the ship needed some minor maintenance for us to continue our voyage, so this unexpected stop in Freeport was actually a welcome change. My sister and I were in our inside cabin when we heard a huge thud and felt the ship sway back and forth. My sister joked how it felt like we were hitting an iceberg and we were on the Titanic, and I told her that wasn't very funny. Well, within minutes, the captain came on and said our ship had been struck by another ship. While Mariner of the Seas was docked in Freeport, another ship was attempting to dock alongside us. The wind blew this ship into us, causing the other ship's bridge to collide with our aft railing. Luckily, no one was hurt during this incident. The captain said they had reviewed the damage and found that it was only cosmetic. The wraparound walking path would be closed because there was a large gouge on the ship's aft. We were able to cruise as scheduled, although the ship looked pretty janky with her new hull. Another horrible thing that has happened to me, and perhaps the worst thing that has happened, is that my grandma passed away while I was cruising. Back in 2017, I was cruising in the Mediterranean with my family and my husband. After a busy day exploring the port of Florence and Pisa, we were on our way to Rome when we received this horrible news. The following day, we brought her picture with us to Rome where she was blessed by the Pope. It's tough trying to enjoy your vacation when a death in your family happens and your heart is hurting. However, I was really grateful and happy to be with my family during this time so that we could grieve together. Another terrible thing that happened is getting norovirus. Getting sick on a cruise is never fun. Due to close quarters on board, illness can spread more easily, allowing contagious diseases like norovirus to wreak havoc. During my high school graduation cruise with my family to Greece and Turkey, I fell ill one evening. I spent most of the night making trips to and from the bathroom, and I had never felt so sick while on a cruise. After a trip to the onboard doctor, they diagnosed me with norovirus, which is a gastrointestinal illness. I was quarantined to our cabin for the following day, which was a sea day, and prescribed medication that would help me with the stomach pain. Much to my disappointment, I still wasn't feeling well enough to visit Ephesus, Turkey, but I was so disappointed that I was sick and missing out on such an exciting port. I've only had norovirus once during a cruise, and I am now extremely diligent about hand washing and sanitizing. Another, perhaps crazy thing that happened to me while cruising is an earthquake on the Leaning Tower of Pisa. During that same graduation trip, my family and I were visiting Pisa, Italy to see the famous Leaning Tower of Pisa. We purchased tickets to visit the top of the tower and waited our turn to go to the top. After walking up the slippery stairs, we were enjoying the views from the top of the tower when we started to feel it sway. Considering that the structure is indeed leaning, we figured it was normal that the tower might not feel structurally sound. All of a sudden, the workers started yelling, "Go, go, go, everyone leave," to go down the stairs very quickly. Everyone scrambled down the stairs to the bottom of the tower, and we were told there that there had just been an earthquake, so everyone needed to be evacuated for safety. That was certainly an excursion to remember. Another horrible thing that's happened to me while cruising is having missed ports. One of the most disappointing things that can happen during a cruise can be missing a highly anticipated port. Last year, I had 2 cruises with missed ports, which had never happened to me before, actually. As a destination-focused cruiser, I book sailing specifically for their itineraries most of the time. While sailing around the British Isles last fall, we missed 2 ports of call. There was a massive storm that passed over the region, causing large swells and rough seas. Because of this, we were unable to dock at 2 of our ports of call, the Isle of Man and Dublin, Ireland. Considering Isle of Man is a remote destination in the UK, I was really eager to visit this port of call because I'd never been there before, and also Dublin was supposed to be one of the most exciting ports on our itinerary. Much to our disappointment, we had 2 additional sea days instead. However, the captain did arrange for us to arrive in Cobh, Ireland the day before we were scheduled, so we had an unexpected overnight visit which allowed us to go to Cork and Kinsale. The second time I missed a port of call was this January when I was cruising in Africa. Bad weather and low tides meant our ship wasn't able to dock in Madagascar as planned. After traveling across the globe to visit these destinations, I was so disappointed I could have cried. Missing ports of call on bucket list itineraries is truly heartbreaking for those of us who are world travelers. Another horrible thing that has happened to me while cruising is I was left behind from an excursion. During a cruise to Alaska, my friend Sydney and I were actually left behind from an excursion. Even with all of my cruising experience, this was the first time I had ever experienced this unlikely scenario. On board our cruise, my friend and I decided to book a last-minute excursion for the following day. When we disembarked the ship to meet at the designated spot, we arrived to find that our excursion had already left without us. Apparently, the excursion list was printed the night before we arrived at the port with 13 guests on the list. That morning, 2 new guests had booked spots on the tour, so there was a total of 15 guests technically booked on this excursion. However, the list was not updated to reflect these 2 new people buying tickets, so the tour operators were only expecting 13 guests to show up. So when 13 guests arrived for the tour, they left without us. Although we had arrived on time for the excursion at the meeting spot, they thought the entire group had already arrived and there was no point in waiting. This was pretty shocking and frustrating as there was no other option for us to take the same excursion and they didn't turn around to come pick us up. And finally, another terrible thing that has happened to me while cruising is this odd spa debacle. While sailing on that same Alaskan cruise, I decided to splurge on my first ever massage on board. After a night of rough seas, I had a knot in my neck that was uncomfortable. I've had neck and shoulder problems for years following sports injuries in high school, so this didn't really surprise me, although it was uncomfortable. After arriving to the spa, the masseuse started working on my neck and shoulders. I told her that I had this knot in my neck and shoulder area after the rough seas the night before. She proceeded to tell me that I didn't have a knot. Instead, I had a tumor and I needed to see a doctor very soon. I asked her if she could clarify if she meant that I needed to maybe see a chiropractor or a physical therapist. She said no, I needed to see a doctor soon to examine the mass because early detection is very important. I reiterated to her that this knot had just appeared after I didn't sleep well, but she insisted that she had medical background back in the Philippines to diagnose this. I was very confused and started to cry. I was unsure why the masseuse was insinuating that I had some sort of serious illness. I booked a massage at the spa to relax, and this was the total opposite of relaxing, especially because I'm a hypochondriac. She asked then if I wanted to book the acupuncture doctor to ease my anxieties following the massage because I was crying, which I found to also be very inappropriate. Needless to say, I did not enjoy this massage at all, and I left the spa crying. Luckily, the spa manager made this debacle right and gave me a refund and also reassured me that that was out of their scope of practice. All right, everybody, those are the worst things that have happened to me while cruising. As someone who's been cruising for 20 years, I have been to 60 countries and I've been on almost 50 cruises at this point. Comment below if you've ever had something terrible happen to you while cruising and how did you deal with it? Thanks for tuning in today, everybody. Be sure to like and subscribe to Cruise Blogs so that you can be notified every time we have a new video. Until next time, happy cruising.